Next up, we need to create a view helper for our breadcrumb. And what we can do is create a partial to do that. If you're not familiar with the concept of a partial is simply a small widget or a UI component that can be reused over and over inside of a web application. So in Zend, we can add a partial underneath our view area. What we want to do is create a new folder here. We'll call it partial. And then within inside of the partial, we're going to create a breadcrumb.html file. This partial is going to get used over and over and configured with our navigation stack that we just set up based off of the current page that we're on. And the reason why we're adding this partial is so we can set up the Twitter bootstraps and style it exactly how we want it. If you want to use the basic default breadcrumb output, you don't have to create the partial, you can just output the breadcrumb. But we want to make this a little fancier. So by adding the breadcrumb, we can paste this code in here, and you'll notice that we give it a class of breadcrumb, and this is a Twitter bootstrap class. Essentially, we're just going to loop through all of the pages that the navigation stack returns and print out our breadcrumb trail. So once the partial's there, the last thing we need to do is update our main layout. Since this is something that we want to have happen on every page, we can update the main layout.html file, and we can put this near where we render our content. So we probably don't want to put the breadcrumb trail above our navigation header bar, so probably the best place to do it would be right underneath the container just above our main content. Okay, so here's a little fancier version of the code snippet I showed on the previous slides talking about how we spit out the breadcrumb. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening here. So the first thing we're doing is we're getting a hold of the navigation stack. That's the key that we set up in the module.config.php file, and that contains our sitemap and navigation. From there, we get the breadcrumbs off of it, and what we want to do is set the minimum depth to 0. That way it starts all the way from the beginning of the breadcrumb trail and moves all the way to the current page that we're on. If we didn't set that, it would just show the current page that you've navigated to. So setting the minimum depth to 0 is an important part of our breadcrumb trail. And then last, we specify our partial by pointing to the partial breadcrumb.html file that we just added. And again, this is an optional call on our navigation stack that we don't need to do unless you want to do some specific stylings for your breadcrumb. So let's save this and then go give it a try in the application. So here's our previous view. You'll notice we don't have a breadcrumb trail now. If we just do a refresh, you'll see that our breadcrumb bar has now shown up. We're currently on the home portion of the application. If I move into my book list manually, that is the root of it as well. Because remember, we had two elements in our navigation stack. One was the home, the other was book. But the book had some nested navigation sitemaps on there, and one was the add new book. If we go to the add new book, you'll now see that we have book and then add. It looks like we have an issue with our dividers. We can go and pull those out of the partial or fix those. I'm not too worried about that. The whole point here was to show kind of how the breadcrumb works. You'll notice that the add is not a link, but the book is. It can take me back to my book list. And if I go to the edit or delete screens, my navigation bar updates appropriately. As you can see, it's not going to take much more to get our navigation bar working with the rest of our application. But you do have to remember, anytime you add new views or new controllers, you need to make sure that you update your navigation stack inside of that application module config.php file.